Good to have you back with us on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. The other day on my Facebook, I posted a Give Me a Minute talking about the World Trade Organization and what they have done to the United States and producers. Years ago in the Farm Bill, we had country original labeling put in. In other words, the food would be labeled. The beef and pork and chicken would be labeled in your grocery store because it would help producers. It's a food security issue. Well, of course, some other countries, such as Canada and Mexico, have complained vehemently about it, filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization, and now this international tribunal is telling the United States that we are facing $1 billion in sanctions and fines if we don't fix this. For more on this, let's turn to President of the National Farmers Union, Roger Johnson. Roger, good to have you back with us.
Good to be with you, Ed. It's quite a deal, isn't it?
Well, it really is. It's basically an outside organization telling the United States, this is what you're going to do, and this is what's going to happen. How else do we interpret that?
You know, there's really not a good other way to interpret it. And if you want to really understand how bad it is, the tribunal that found against us was chaired by a Mexican national who used to work for the Mexican government as a trade official. And so you have these private sector folks. This is basically multinational corporations that in many ways run this dispute resolution system at the WTO and overrule sovereign laws of nations like ours. And it's just wrong. And, cool isn't just about the producers and about national security. It's about consumers. I mean, consumers by 90% plus margins over 10 years of data show they want to know. They want to know more and more about their food. They support this law.
Well, that is the key. When you go into the grocery store, over 90% of Americans want to know where their food's coming from. This strips down that barrier, and it also greases the skids for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the next deal that the president is pushing. That beef could be from Vietnam and have a USDA stamp on it, and it wouldn't mean anything. You wouldn't know what quality of beef you're getting.
Yeah. In fact, if the Congress repeals this law, and so far the House of Representatives has already done that, and not only did they repeal what the WTO found against, which was beef and pork, they repealed poultry, ground beef, and ground pork. So they went way beyond even what the WTO found. So if Congress does that, if they repeal it and stick it on the omnibus, which is the conversation that's happening right now, we will be back in a situation where a multinational meat company can bring an animal in from anywhere in the world, slaughter it here, put a made in the USA label on the meat that comes from it, and peddle it as a U.S. product.
And in this next trade agreement, there's going to be quotas that we are going to have to accept a certain amount of their agricultural products, aren't we?
You know, that may be true. I'm not sure about the quota piece. You probably know that better than I do, Ed. I do know that the beef deal that we got with TPP is nothing to brag about.
Yeah.
The biggest access we get is to the Japanese market, and they basically give us about a 2 to 3% increase in what our sales are from year to year. And if we ever exceed that, then they snap back to the 38% tariffs.
Okay.
So we're right back to where we are today.
We're visiting with Roger Johnson, President of the National Farmers Union. This ruling by the WTO smacking $1 billion worth of sanctions is going to force the congressional hand. The representatives are going to put it in the omnibus bill, and they're going to strip cool out, although the public wants cool. Now, this also sets the table for corporations in the TPP going further to sue in our country if they don't get the kind of results they want. I mean, this is just a slippery slope all the way. This is the United States Congress caving. Now, what recourse could we have to push back on this WTO ruling?
That's a really good question because there's not much. We as a country signed into the WTO. We agreed to abide by its rules and its rulings. And if we don't, and you know, the president made this statement that there's nothing that these trade agreements are going to, they're not going to change any of our laws. Technically, he's correct. By themselves, they can't change the laws. But what they will do is exactly what they're doing with coal. They put $1 billion sanction on you, and what choice do you have? So what we would suggest that the Congress does is leave it off the omnibus. I mean, the reason the American people are so disgusted with congressional performance is because they don't get anything done all year. And then at the very last minute, on the big omnibus appropriations bills, which if they don't pass, it shuts down the government, they literally tack dozens and dozens of pieces of legislation that they couldn't get through the Congress in regular order. They tack them onto that bill, and then they pass them. And it's that kind of stuff acting in the dark of night is why the American people are so disgusted with this performance. They ought to leave it alone and take it up under regular order and debate it, and they'll find an alternative that makes some sense.
Do you have allies in Congress that are going to fight this? I mean, I know that there are some. The House has already voted to get rid of coal. Hell, you had the Ag Secretary, Vilsack from Iowa, telling the Congress that they had to strip this out. That's how corrupt this whole thing is.
Yeah.
You're going to tell me beef producers in Iowa don't want labeling? Come on.
Yeah. I mean, there is a legitimate resolution to this that would at least say, hey, if you're going to repeal beef and pork, replace it with a requirement on a voluntary label. So no one's required to label, but if they do label, they cannot label a product as a product of the U.S. unless it's born, raised, and slaughtered in the U.S. They're even opposing that. Now, that is an alternative that's out there. I would say the chances of that getting attached to the omnibus are not good, but it is certainly something that they could do if they wanted to attach something to the omnibus that is not so crazy offensive to the American people.
Roger Johnson, always great to visit. Keep up the fight, my friend. I appreciate your time.
Good to be with you, Ed. You take care.
You bet. President of National Farmers Union, Roger Johnson, with us.